The purpose of this presentation is to summarize the history of the U.S. Coast Guard's participation and support in the International Ocean Weather Station program in order to inform and educate those who had never heard of this vital historical ocean meteorological and navigational endeavor, as well as reminding those who actually were a part of it to reminisce with the memories of a time gone by. International cooperation concerning weather in the Atlantic as early as the 1860s, when Britain began connecting coastal lightships with submarine telegraph cables so they could be used as weather stations. These were attempts to strategically station weather ships using submarine cables far out into the Atlantic. The first of these was in 1870 with the old corvette vessels. This and other attempts ultimately came to nothing, and the project had to await the commencement of radiotelegraphy, which would provide them with the long-distance communication capability that they required. Another early proposal for weather ships occurred in connection with aviation in August of 1927, when influential representatives of the aircraft design industry, along with supporting governments, concluded that with the development of the seaplane, which would result in regular long-distance ocean flights, it meant that strategically placed, fully functional ocean weather stations would be needed within 10 years. During the period between 1936 and 1937, the British Meteorological Office installed a meteorologist aboard a North Atlantic cargo steamer to make special surface weather observations and release pilot balloons to measure the winds aloft at 6-hour intervals. In 1938 and 39, France then established a merchant ship as the first stationary weather ship, which took surface observations and launched radiosondes to measure weather conditions aloft. It might be noted, radiosondes are battery-operated telemetry instruments which are carried into the atmosphere, usually by weather balloons, to measure various atmospheric parameters and then transmit the collected data by radio to a surface receiver.
The Ocean Station program began shortly before World War II. By international agreement, 12 such stations are operated. The United States mans 6, 4 in the Atlantic Ocean and 2 in the Pacific. Our commitment is met by 26 major Coast Guard cutters and 3,700 officers and men. The Owasco class, 255 feet long, 2,000 tons. The Casco class, 311 feet long, of 2,100 tons. And Secretary class, 327 feet long, of 2,200 tons, are the types of Coast Guard cutters which man the ocean stations. These stations are maintained in good weather and bad and manned by Coast Guard vessels for a period of 21 days before being relieved. Average en route time to or from stations is 7 days in such weather and seas, when an ocean station can be 44,000 square miles of bad weather. Except to participate in a search and rescue mission, it is rare for such ships to leave station. Normally, they cruise in a 10-mile square area. The missions of the ocean station vessels are to collect and transmit meteorological information to the U.S. Weather Bureau, to en route aircraft, and to service vessels, to maintain a state of readiness, to perform search and rescue missions, to provide vessels and aircraft with aids to navigation information, and to collect, collate, and transmit synoptic oceanographic data. In a joint program with the Oceanographic Office, ocean station vessels en route to and from, and while on station, make frequent bathythermographic observations daily. A slide placed in the bathythermograph is lowered to a predetermined depth. These observations are of extreme importance to our increased knowledge of the ocean's inner space, both for a general increase in scientific knowledge and in the interest of national defense. After the instrument has been recovered aboard ship, the smoked slide is removed and the stylus's trace on the slide permits interpretation for readings of pressure and temperature. While the ships are on station, plankton samplings are taken from time to time, providing information regarding the ocean's food supplies. The accumulation of meteorological information is the primary mission of the ocean station vessel. Personnel of the U.S. Weather Bureau release a large weather balloon which is electronically configured to transmit upper air data to the ship. Interpretation of these data permits the ocean station to provide accurate and current upper air information to passing aircraft and assist in forecasting of world weather patterns. Transoceanic aircraft often ask ocean station vessels for navigational checks and upper air information. The ocean station vessel's beacon is turned on for the plane, and she is carefully tracked by the ship's radar. An accurate position can thus be provided the plane, and she can be informed of the upper air winds at her flight altitude. Every day, hundreds of such advices are provided to airlines of every nation, increasing the safety of the planes and their passengers. A high state of military readiness must be maintained. General Quarters sends the crew to their battle stations on the double. Anti-submarine warfare drills maintain the cutter's proficiency in her wartime role as a convoy escort. Frequent gunnery exercises are conducted to ensure a combat-ready capability. When weather permits, lifeboat drills provide the crew training so necessary in small boat handling when emergencies occur. When an urgent call comes from a merchant ship with an injured man aboard, the ocean station vessel responds. A lifeboat may be sent to remove the injured man from the merchant vessel and take him to medical assistance aboard the ocean station vessel. The cutters on the more remote ocean stations carry public health service doctors for just such eventualities. Or, on very short notice, the ship's boats may be needed to rescue survivors from a ditched aircraft. Through good fortune and good management, we have never lost a survivor from such ditchings. An SOS may take the ocean station vessel from her normal patrol duties. Hundreds of such responses on errands of mercy are made each year by the cutters. In this case, a ship has lost her rudder. The Coast Guard cutter maneuvers to take the damaged ship in tow in heavy swells. She will tow the vessel to a rendezvous arranged with a commercial tug that will then take her safely to the nearest port. The job accomplished, the cutter returns to her patrol area to finish out the long patrol period. After a month of such rigorous duty, the arrival of the relief ship is a welcome sight. If weather permits, mail and movies will be exchanged, together with an exchange of navigational information, and so the cycle continues. But the newly arrived cutter can expect her full share of labor, too. When suddenly it happens, the crackle of the SOS, and the cutter has another rendezvous with danger. This time, a freighter on the verge of foundering and a crew that is waiting to be rescued put to the severest tests the training and seamanship of the rescue vessel. The last survivor is finally brought on board. satisfying proof of the Coast Guard's motto, Semper Paratus, always ready in the service of the country and humanity.
Starting in 1939, Coast Guard vessels were used as weather ships to protect transatlantic air commerce as a response to the crash of Pan American Airways' Hawaiian Clipper during a trans-Pacific flight in 1938. In January of 1940, FDR authorized the Atlantic Weather Observation Service, and in early 1941, 5 327-foot Coast Guard cutters were used to perform weather patrols, usually deployed for 3 weeks at a time and then sent back for 10 days. As World War II continued, the cutters were needed for the war effort, and by August of 1942, 6 Coast Guard manned cargo vessels had replaced them. Although these ships were modestly armed, they didn't possess sonar, radar, and high-frequency direction-finding equipment. They were vulnerable to attack, which contributed to the loss of the Coast Guard cutter Muskeget WAG-48 and its entire crew of 121 officers and men. The relationship between ocean weather stations and International Ice Patrol is an interesting one. The ocean station cutters were not officially ice patrol vessels. However, like many Coast Guard missions, there was a beneficial overlap. The Ice Patrol definitely made use of the weather information and iceberg report provided by the ocean station cutters. Ocean stations Bravo and Delta were definitely in iceberg country, particularly Bravo. The ocean stations were positioned under transatlantic air routes, and once on station, the cutters were primarily confined to their 110 square mile patrol area of responsibility. This limited the iceberg data they could provide, but all sightings were useful in determining the limits of all known ice. All vessels transiting Ice Patrol area of responsibility are required to report iceberg sightings. The ocean station cutters transiting to and from station provided important iceberg data, especially when making a port call in St. John's, Newfoundland. The folks at Ice Patrol Operations Center used the complex array of data in coming up with their forecasts. A sighting of an iceberg and reporting its position is obviously the most powerful, especially when it comes to an accurate description of the berg's size, shape, etc. Today, they have the benefit of very sophisticated berg analysis and prediction system computer models. Back in the era of the ocean stations, it was much more of an art. The station itself was a specific location, latitude and longitude, in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. The on-station, or Oscar Sierra on-station, was a 10 by 10 square mile of water. The idea was to remain at or near this grid. The whole station was 110 miles square, which was divided up into alpha-designated quadrants. Unless otherwise directed, the OODs would keep the ship on or near center station. As the ship would drift to another quadrant of the station grid, it would key a beacon with that particular alpha code. Each time it would enter a new grid location, it would change the beacon code. The signal generated by the beacon would serve to notify passing aircraft and vessels where the ocean station ship was, which they could in turn utilize as a reference point for their own navigational purposes. In both Atlantic and Pacific, the exact location of ocean weather stations, their latitude and longitude, were predetermined based on a number of contributing factors, including but not limited to most common air and sea navigational routes, the availability of participating countries and ships with the capabilities, and communication needs based on long-distance capabilities at that time in history. By the 1960s, the entire fleet of ocean station vessels won the Flight Safety Foundation Award for their distinguished service to aviation. In 1965, there were a total of 21 vessels in the weather ship network. 9 were from the U.S., 4 from the UK, 3 from France, 2 from the Netherlands, 2 from Norway, and 1 from Canada. In addition to the U.S. and Canada, from the early 60s to the mid-70s, Russia, the Netherlands, South Africa participated in ocean weather stations in the Pacific as far down as 40 degrees latitude. Secretary Class 327-foot cutters. The 327-foot cutters were the queens of the fleet. These steam-powered ships had beautiful classic lines, a smooth cruiser bow, and excellent length-to-beam ratio for sea-keeping in any weather. They were quiet, the wood decking supplied wonderful insulation, and they were air-conditioned. The biggest drawback to the 327s was their fuel capacity. In many cases over the years, fuel stops were required both coming from and going to assigned station. 311-foot former Navy seaplane tenders. Unlike the 327s, the 311-foot WAVP had tons of fuel capacity. They were World War II vintage, and when retired by the Navy, when most of the need for remote seaplane bases ended, the Coast Guard grabbed them up. They were diesel-powered and had a low length-to-beam ratio, about like a destroyer escort, but they were a little longer. They rode reasonably well in a head sea if it wasn't especially rough. On the other hand, they were awful in a beam and quarter or drifting on station. The pitch and roll was quick and violent. Additionally, they were noisy and always smelled of diesel fuel both inside and out. Most of the time, they made it to station on 2 of the 4 engines, and not fun at all when heading back home on only 2. 255-foot Lake-class cutters. The 255-footers were ships unique to the Coast Guard. A total of 13 cutters in this class were built, all named after lakes. They were initially heavily armed for World War II service and designated as patrol gunboats, WPGs. Later stripped of most of their armament shortly after the war. In 1965, they were redesignated as High Endurance Cutters, WHEC, after the Coast Guard adopted its own designation system. The 255-foot class was an ice-going design, although many veterans of Northern Ocean Weather Station patrols, having sailed on these class cutters, claimed that they were too small and had no business in the winter in the North Atlantic. All things considered, however, these original Coast Guard ships served their crews well and survived a bit longer than the original designers, builders, and Coast Guard planners would have imagined. 378-foot Hamilton-class cutters. The 378s, named after former Secretaries of the Treasury and Coast Guard heroes, were designed to be highly versatile platforms capable of performing various operations, including maritime law enforcement, search and rescue, oceanographic research, and defense operations. Because of their endurance and capabilities, this advanced class of cutters was commonly deployed with Navy carrier battle groups. They were the very first U.S. military vessels with combination diesel or gas turbine operation. They were also equipped with a helicopter flight deck, retractable hangar, and facilities to fully support helicopter deployment. They were used very effectively on the Ocean Weather Station program until its end in the late 1970s. Collection of raw weather data and reporting. As the name of the operation would imply, the primary objective of the Ocean Weather Station project was to report actual weather conditions at various locations in both the Atlantic and Pacific, and routinely report that information to the National Weather Service back in the U.S. The crew checked water temperatures with a bathythermograph every 4 hours down to a depth of 450 feet. They also assisted U.S. Weather Bureau weather observers, 2 to 3 on board each ship, who typically accompanied each patrol. Twice daily, the observers and crew launched 6-foot diameter helium-filled balloons that measured air temperature, pressure, and humidity at an altitude of 10 miles. They launched another similar balloon to measure wind speed and direction. The data collected would then be analyzed by the weather observers, from which messages would be drafted and transmitted back to the Weather Bureau via Morse code on U.S. government frequencies by the shipboard radioman. In addition to the data collected on board each weather ship, Weather observer messages, known as OBS, would be collected from other transoceanic vessels and forwarded back to the U.S., once again using Morse code over U.S. communication channels around the clock. As briefly discussed earlier, one of the primary missions of the ocean station vessel was to remain on or near a particular spot or station, allowing passing ships and planes to obtain a fix on that location, thus being able to determine their own location in relation to that semi-stationary spot at sea. All ocean station weather ships were equipped with a beacon, which continuously transmitted their exact location with respect to the center of that particular ocean station. Also, as it relates to other ships at sea in the general area, ocean station vessels would collect merchant vessel location reports, which were voluntarily submitted by passing ships under what was known as the American Merchant Vessel Reporting System, also known as AMVERS, AMVERS. This reporting and tracking process would include as a minimum vessel name, approximate location, latitude, longitude, origin, destination, estimated date and time of arrival. As was the case with weather reporting, this information was received by the Ocean Station Radio Gang and in turn relayed to Coast Guard headquarters in Washington, D.C. International distress frequencies were continuously monitored during the entire patrol for SOS calls and other forms of distress on the high seas. Over the years, Coast Guard station ships intercepted many of these calls for help and responded accordingly with search and rescue actions, saving many lives. Icebergs drifting southerly in the Atlantic would most often enter into areas patrolled by Coast Guard ocean station cutters. On station Delta and Bravo in particular, because these stations were located in what they called the typical drift route for these huge, dangerous bodies of ice. In these cases, while transiting these areas, the bergs would be closely monitored, pertinent data reported to representatives of the International Ice Patrol. In some cases, smaller bergs would be used for target practice by ship's ordnance personnel. Existing communication capability, particularly prior to the advent of satellites, required the ability to communicate over long distance. However, only Morse code, or what was known as continuous wave CW, could answer that need because of the enormous distances involved. Using a variety of high-power transmitters and sensitive receivers with the capability of assessing a wide spectrum of government and communication frequency channels, the Coast Guard had long-distance capability and utilized it when needed. Many times it required creative transmission and reception techniques, such as a technique known as radio diversity communication, or RDC, where more than one frequency would be used to transmit simultaneously or receive the same message. Coast Guard Cutter Pontchartrain, WHEC 70.
October 16, 1956, Pan American Airlines Stratocruiser Sovereign of the Skies left Honolulu on schedule for San Francisco. The weather good. Visibility clear and winds favorable. 31 people on board. But these things changed. At almost the exact point of no return, Flight 943 developed engine trouble. And within a span of less than 10 minutes, 2 engines had failed. At 0322, Captain Dick Ogg sent a radio message.
Ocean Station November, Ocean Station November. This is Pan Am Flight 943. We've developed engine trouble and may have to ditch. Will you give us a beacon and bearing? Over.
21,000 feet below, at a range of 38 miles, is Ocean Station November, the Coast Guard cutter Pontchartrain.
Radar range is made and reported. And in less than 3 minutes, W.K. Earl, commanding officer of the Pontchartrain, is on the bridge. The general alarm is sounded. Searchlights are orbited overhead, and constant radio communications set up between the distressed aircraft and Ocean Station November. 8 minutes pass, and Pilot Og reports.
November, we are preparing to ditch. Please give us ditching procedures and conditions of the sea.
Roger. Roger. We're prepared to assist you. All hands are alerted and at their rescue stations. The condition of the sea, low swells running. Wind, southeasterly.
Many things are happening at one time. Lifeboats swung on their davits are readied for lowering. A shark watch is posted. And aboard the plane, a busy crew has calculated their chances of lasting until daylight. Captain Og has made his decision.
November, this is 943. It appears we can hold altitude. We'll try to stay aloft until daylight.
We will try to stay aloft until daylight. There began the long period of waiting. A period of time used by Commander Earl for rehearsal for the oncoming moment that the plane would touch the water. Above, in lazy 8-mile circles, the plane uses up its fuel. Information is passed between plane and ship. The evacuation plans. How the passengers and crew would debark. The equipment carried by the small rescue boats. What to do in case of fire. The position and direction of landing. The handling of the children. With the brighter light, practice runs are made by the large aircraft, and Captain Og has a personal observation.
Your ship is sure a beautiful sight.
Thank you. We think so. Glad it's a comfort to you. We've got your bacon and eggs on the fire.
At 0730, the plane announces it will ditch about 0830. Final plans are put into effect.
943, this is November. We're all set, fella. We'll need some advance word so we can lay the foam path for you.
Roger, roger. 10 minutes to ditch.
This is November again. I want to assure you that we're all set and we'll do the best we can. Good luck and God bless you.
One minute to ditch. This is it.
At 0815, the plane hits the water.
Full speed ahead. Lower away the boats. Lower away the boats.
A skillful landing by Dick Og enables the aircraft to stay afloat. And in a matter of minutes, passengers are on the wing and inflating the plane's life rafts. Coast Guardsman Ronald Christian boards the aircraft and finds it empty of people. Everyone has been saved. Even before the plane sinks, the boats are headed for the cutter. On the lee side of the Pontchartrain, Jacob's ladders have been rigged, and the survivors are brought aboard. One of the little twin girls. A mother and the mother's child. Warm blankets and strong hands are a welcome sight to the bewildered but happy people. All 31 men, women, and children brought from the dead aircraft to the decks of the cutter Pontchartrain. Safe and homeward bound because of the alertness, the skill, and the determination of two crews under the leadership of Captain Dick Ogg of Pan American Airlines and Commander W.K. Earl of the United States Coast Guard.
Coast Guard Cutter Bib, WPG 31.
The date was October 14th, 1947. The place, the North Atlantic. The American-owned flying boat, the Bermuda Sky Queen, on its way from Ireland to Newfoundland, was running low on fuel. The pilot decided to fly towards the Coast Guard cutter Bib on Ocean Station and then ditched his plane close enough so that the passengers and crew could be picked up by the Bib. An initial attempt to pass a line from the cutter to the plane failed, so in gale-force winds and 30-foot seas, the Bib's crew used a 15-man rubber raft and a small boat to rescue all 69 passengers and crew. Considered one of the greatest rescues of all time, the Bib and her crew received a hero's welcome when they arrived in Boston. This has been a Coast Guard moment.
Coast Guard Cutter Winona, WHEC 65, and Coast Guard Cutter Taney, WHEC 37. This video is silent. Coast Guard Cutter Owasco, WHEC 39, Ocean Station Bravo.
Ocean Station Bravo, North Atlantic Ocean, somewhere south of Greenland, somewhere far from home. Nothing on the radar, nothing on the sonar, hove to and drifting on this ocean all alone. She was the CGC Sevago, ocean station vessel, high endurance cutter, number 42, studying the weather, aids to navigation, plotting ships and aircraft as they come sailing through. Just a speck upon the ocean, center of the circle, nothing but horizon, wind and sea and sky. This whole world in motion, blowing from the northwest, not a hint of sunshine, just the gray waves rolling by. Lookout calls the bridge wing, objects in the water, moving surface contact, off the starboard bow, plot 'em on the radar, fire up the sonar, listen for the echoes, oh can't you hear them now? And there's echoes in the headphones, whale songs from the speakers, filling all the spaces inside CIC. Songs of love and travel, songs of generations, echoes of the ages in cetacean harmony. And me, I had to answer. I sang, I talked, I whistled, even played the mouth.
Interesting and fun facts associated with ocean weather station patrols from those who lived it. Educational, inspirational, and other valuable reading material while on station. Other than the Holy Bible and correspondence course textbooks, other educational literature was available for sale or trade with other crew members. Here are some of the periodicals we exchanged during patrol. Drills, and more drills. Almost daily, even occasionally on weekends, ocean station vessels would experience drills. From man overboard to ASW, to fire, to general quarters, to gunnery, to lifeboat, you name it, and they drilled it. The types and duration of drills were generally based on the weather, limiting undue risk to crew members under adverse weather conditions. Off-duty time, R&R. When off-duty, there were many and varied options for the crew. Things such as BSing with shipmates on the mess deck for coffee or bug juice, writing letters, movies, reading various types of literature, live music groups, skeet shooting, playing cards, checkers and chess, acey-doocy, crossword puzzles, picture puzzles, prayer groups, volleyball, haircuts, ship store visits, even swim call in the warmer climes for some brave souls. For many, just catching up on well-needed rest. Daily life while on ocean station. Typical daily routine activities aboard ship while on ocean station consisted of some of the following: day in, day out. Usually beginning with morning muster, chow call, helm watch, radio watch, deck duty, ordnance checks, OOD on the bridge, weather support operations, engine room and boiler room watches, CIC watch, sick bay, and many more. How bad did the weather get? Pretty bad. Depending on the station and, of course, the time of year, the weather could change frequently. Winter months in particular were the worst. Water temperatures almost always were near or at freezing temps, with high winds, frequent storms, and very heavy seas, all of which were not uncommon. Breaking excessive accumulated ice on the superstructure of the ship at times with baseball bats was an all-hands activity when not on watch. Some storms were so bad it forced the ship to steam off station in an attempt to avoid them and sail around them before returning to station coordinates as conditions eased. Relieving station, patrol complete. Now hear this. Relief ship sighted, you would sometimes hear over the ship's PA system. What a sight, what a day. Finally going back home. This is the day the crew had been anticipating the most, the day the relief ship would arrive. Most of the crew would line the rails to see this very welcome sight at the end of day 20 or 21 on station. Before the formal relief of station, and weather permitting, the relieving ship would transfer such things as new movies, mail, miscellaneous supplies, foodstuffs, fresh water on occasion, and spare parts as needed. Rest and recreation stops on the return leg after being relieved from Ocean Station. On the Atlantic side, port of calls such as Argentia, Newfoundland, Quebec City, St. John's, Newfoundland, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Dublin, Ireland, Rotterdam, Holland, Jamaica, Bermuda, and Labrador. On the Pacific side, places like Yokosuka, Japan, Sasebo, Japan, Midway, Honolulu, Maui, and Subic Bay in the Philippines. Participating Coast Guard cutters in the Ocean Station program: Absecon, Androscoggin, Barataria, Bering Strait, Bibb, Boutwell, Campbell, Casco, Castle Rock, Chase, Chautauqua, Chincoteague, Cook Inlet, Coos Bay, Dallas, Dexter, Duane, Gallatin, Gresham, Hamilton, Half Moon, Humboldt, Ingham, Jarvis, Mackinac, Matagorda, McCullough, Mellon, Mendota, Midget, Monroe, Morgenthau, Owasco, Pontchartrain, Rockaway, Rush, Sebago, Sherman, Spencer, Unimac, Winnebago, Yakutat. Also in the early days of the program, the following cutters served Ocean Station duty: Algonquin, Cayuga, Comanche, Mojave, Northland, Iroquois, Wachusett, Winona, and Klamath. Epilogue. The last Ocean Weather Station patrol was performed in late 1977, when improvements in satellite weather reading, communications, and long-range radio navigational aids made a ship and 140 coasties sailing for a month inside a 10-mile box unnecessary and uneconomical. After 38 long, arduous years involving untold thousands of Coast Guard men and women, completing over 8,500 patrols, the Ocean Weather Station program came to a successful end. Like other important historical events, many in our country will never know what transpired during those years and the benefit to mankind this vital program provided. This presentation, in a small way, is intended to shed some light and understanding on this contribution by the United States Coast Guard. God bless all those that sailed in harm's way. Semper Paratus. Thank you.